Let's look at what some of our choices are then, as we look at changes in thinking or look at changes that you're being impacted with. I think we have basically three choices. One is we can sit on the line, the getting by line, and be a survivor. Somebody should do something about this. That's one choice. Kind of sit there and wait for somebody to take some kind of action. It's kind of comfortable to sit there and wait for somebody else to do something and just see what's going to happen. So that's one choice. Now sometimes I call this an above-the-line positive survivor, is someone where it is a wise thing to do. Let's wait and see, is this really a trend that's developing? Is this new technology really something we want to jump on right away? Or should we just wait a little bit to see it till it proves itself out? And there's times when we really want to do that. There's other times when we can slip down below the line into a below-the-line survivor, and we can go from skepticism, healthy skepticism, to cynicism. And cynicism is, oh yeah, here we go again, seen this stuff before. Duck, they've been off to a conference. And if we lay low long enough, this too will pass, right? So it can be some of that kind of, oh, we've seen this stuff come and go, here we go again, what's the new buzzwords, what are the new trends? And so there's a high snicker factor throughout the organization at, here we go again, more of this stuff. And so those kinds of people can fall into the trap of poor old General Sedgwick. He's a casualty of the US Civil War. He's buried at Arlington Cemetery. And these were his last words. They couldn't eat an elephant from this dist. That was it for poor old General Sedgwick. So in our work, we occasionally run into General Sedgwicks. And we recognize that these are people that have gone from skepticism to cynicism and are rapidly falling below the line. But let's go back above the line for a minute. High above the line, way up in very proactive territory, is what we would call the navigator. Or you could use the word leader in a lot of ways. I'm going to take the initiative and I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to do something, not just going to sit around and wait for something to be done. Below the line, in the highly reactive mode, way down here in the powerless area, are people in victim mode. Why bother? There's no point. Forget it. You got to be kidding. Get real. That isn't reality. And I ran into somebody a while ago who I hadn't seen for a while, and I ran into him. I kind of remembered why I hadn't seen him for a while. And I said, hey, Phil, how's it going? He said, same crap, different day. Right? A victim. Someone down in the way one group put it who recognized that they were becoming a little bit of a victim of their culture because they were in a fairly toxic below-the-line culture. And they said, you know, we can visit Pity City once in a while, but it isn't a healthy place to live. Maybe you know some people that are stuck in Pity City. That spend a lot of time down below the line. Why even bother? Forget it. They are doing it to us again. That's always an interesting discussion. Who are they? Well, they, of course, can be management, unions, politicians, your customer, your suppliers, other departments, other groups. Now, of course, all of those people can be factors in creating challenges for us, creating difficulties for us. But it's all about how we approach that. Do we approach it with a kind of giving up response, what Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania calls learned helplessness? It's kind of give up. Why bother? There's no point. Or do we approach it with what he calls learned hopefulness, and where we basically say, well, let's figure out what we can do to make this happen. So do we spend too much time in Pity City? One person who had spent a lot of time in Pity City was really stuck there throwing pity parties. Maybe you know some people who sit around the bars and throw pity parties in Pity City, right? Commiserating about how awful things are, awfulizing the situation. And so he said, I've become to believe that gravity is a myth. The world just sucks. All right? A little too much time in Pity City. A little too much time below the line. Well, it's easy many times for many of us to recognize people around us, to look in our personal lives, look in our business lives, and as I'm talking about this, different people may be popping into your head. What sometimes takes real courage is to look in the mirror. That takes some real courage. To say, how much time am I spending above the line or below the line? If this were a little scatter diagram and there were little points of light for every day of my life, where I spend most of that day, where would most of those little dots end up over the last year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Would I have a whole mass of dots above the line, or would there be quite a lot of dots way down here below the line? Because it is normal once in a while, especially if we're hit with a great setback. I hear sometimes people say, embrace change. And I think, what are you, a masochist? Right? Because some change is awful. Some change is horrible. Some change is catastrophic. It doesn't mean that we embrace the change. But it's all about how we deal with the change. It may be a very negative, awful, horrible, detestable change. But do we deal with it as a victim, or do we deal with it as a navigator? Seligman's book, Learned Optimism, is one I highly recommend. And his most recent book, Authentic Happiness, is another outstanding book. And he defines someone who's a pessimist, but down here in Pity City, as when something negative happens, they make it permanent, pervasive, and personal. The trap of the 3 Ps. Here we go again. One more example. This kind of stuff's always happening everywhere. Just last week in my life, I had this, and it's me, and it's permanent, and it'll always be this way, and I start to turn it inward. So do we fall into the trap of the 3 Ps, or do we have the courage to defy gravity, because gravity does pull below the line, and there are lots of people down there in Pity City, they say misery loves company. There are lots of people down there that just want to pull down, especially the optimists, right? Got to get their heads out of the clouds. Got to get them back to reality. Well, of course, what is reality? Got to get them back to my way of seeing the world, which is how I define reality, and get them back down here into Pity City. So where am I spending most of my time, and where is my team spending most of its time as the heat's on, as the pressure's on? Because as I said, it's difficult sometimes to recognize when we're a little bit off track. Daniel Boone, the great frontiersman, woodsman, once said he was never lost. Right? Never lost, but he did admit to being bewildered once for 3 days. Of course, being a he-man, he would never ask for directions, right, guys? And that didn't help things much. So are we maybe not lost, but a little bit off track? It's useful at times like this, in sessions like this, to sit back, reflect a little bit, and say, where do I spend a lot of my time, and where does my group spend its time? Because, by the way, below the line, what the research shows is that people who spend their time below the line have 3 to 4 times higher incidences of heart attacks, strokes, cancers, and other diseases, and have 800% higher chance of becoming clinically depressed at some point in their lives.